The way in which I think about education data is as somebody who has actually written textbooks for schools at that level. So I'm very much concerned with that area. The problem, once again, is specificity. What kind of curriculum is being taught in these places? Who is determining the curriculum? Who is training the teachers who are teaching in these places? Again, it's usually a top-down affair, regulated by some far-off board of education. It's all about streamlining. It's all about consistency. It's all about measurement. So we want to be able to compare this community with the other community, right? If it is driven in this way, there's no space for anything that's local. And it becomes very difficult to perhaps even enthuse the students with the curriculum. It also becomes an elitist, very quickly can become an elitist institution. So we have to be careful in trying to balance out locale specific education, if I can use that term, with education that's basically synchronic with the rest of the national or provincial curriculum.
Are there any further questions?
Judith.
Well, thanks very much. It's nice to have you here, and I
Thank you.
appreciate you coming over. I guess the question, putting it again, I'm not a sociologist, and so trying to understand what you're presenting and how into my sort of more my practical thinking about particularly the potato industry in Prince Edward Island and the whole this whole very large global industry that's with standards, production standards, agricultural requirements for pesticide application that are required to meet those international potato standards. How is it like? And I know that you've identified PEI as a fief, and I'm wondering also around the issue of like primary exports under preference. It would have come under. Is there any way? Is there a strategy by which Prince Edward Island might be able to develop its own model of what they think is their own PEI standard for producing potatoes, or what might be some strategies to combat this international influence? I guess I don't know if that makes any sense.
It makes sense. I would first of all place PEI today as a combination of natural resources based on a plantation strategy and the fief strategy. Right? So those two together basically cover most of the economic development of the island. Potato farming is a big thing. It's big in many different senses, not just economically. Farmers politically are very, very powerful. Farmers' lobby is something that all politicians on the island fear. Thirdly, there's also the myth of the family farm. If you were to ask me, what is the driving myth of Prince Edward Island, is that people still think that there are many family farms and that they are the hard core of the island community. There are very few family farms left. Moreover, if you combine farming, fishing, and forestry, it's less than 8% of the workforce. And it's going down. So this is very much an image based in the past, but still it's very, very powerful, right? And all politicians speak to it as if it is, it's the elephant in the room. It's there all the time, governing the way that they think. So that's one aspect of the reality. Second aspect of the reality is that, unfortunately, from my perspective, the PEI potato brand is well known. So it conforms to what I have said about branding, but it also means that the current form of the industry is very difficult to change because it's a winning strategy, right? PEI potatoes, right? Who hasn't heard of PEI potatoes? Have you heard of PEI potatoes? Okay, see? So the brand is working. That's the whole point of the brand. And it's associated with top quality, right? So it's successful. Unfortunately, it's predicated on practices that are not sustainable. Nitrate, fertilizer, runoff. Oh no, there are so many environmental issues that have to be faced at some point. And governments have to be very, very careful in how to manage this big, iconic industry that is successful in its own way, but of course, having a fairly unsustainable practice. If you have any answers, tell me.
Change it into sustainable production.
Okay, I mean, wild, but you know, somebody has come up with the idea. Prince Edward Island is an island. Why don't we aim to transform PEI into an organic farm? It would. We have the geography for it. Well, we need to have the political will. It's not easy, because transforming into an organic farm is expensive. But it can be done, perhaps, down the line. Yes, Pat?
I'm just wondering again about the designations that you gave to Prince Edward Island, Newfoundland. What are the implications for island economies or even rural economies that distinguish themselves to participate in regionalism, and what's the fate of regionalism? Because I'm currently involved in several large contribution agreement negotiations that the federal government has simply said will not happen unless there's buy-in. They used to say from the 3 provinces, and they let Newfoundland alone, and now it's increasingly all 4. And I think that as the region's moving population strategies forward, this is going to be increasingly true. And I'm just thinking, what happens? What happens when you have different kinds of economies that, you know, what's optimal for one may be suboptimal for, and are there precedents in the world for islands that have been able to collaborate with regions without suffering? Or
That's a good question. It's a question that addresses all attempts at regionalization, whether they are within the same country or even across countries. When the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States was set up in 1981, this is like a mini European Union with 6 main countries that are members, full members, but they all have similar economies. For example, they compete for tourists. St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Grenada, right? They're all trying to tap mainly the US, Canadian, and the Western European market. Sun, sand, and sea tourism, right? They're competing. But, of course, they realize that there are areas where it doesn't pay to compete. They still compete for tourists, but they don't compete, for example, when it comes to negotiating clear skies agreement with the United States. Because if United Airlines wants to cross into their airspace, it's much easier to negotiate as a bloc with United Airlines or with Northwest Airlines or American Airlines or whatever than by themselves. They have their own common court of justice. They have their own common currency. These are sovereign states. They use the same currency. They use the Eastern Caribbean dollar, which is pegged to the US dollar, right? So the game is to try and slowly, of course, you have to build trust. Absolutely. And usually the trust building starts off before you institutionalize, and then you carry on, right? Through trust building, you set up a modicum of basic rules, a basic understanding. What is it that we allow ourselves to disagree on, because our economies, unfortunately, are not differentiated enough to be able to go in different directions? What can we maximize by collaborating? And perhaps down the line, even where we so far compete, we can, in the long term, start to develop niching strategies that allow us, even within tourism, to differentiate our product. For example, Dominica, which is a member of the OECS, is the green island of the Caribbean. If you're looking for an eco-tourism experience, the only island, this is the brand of Dominica in the Caribbean. This is not the Dominican Republic, by the way, because many Canadians mistake the two. This is a separate country. It's a separate island, Dominica. Dominica is the only island that Columbus would recognize if he were to visit the Caribbean today, because it's basically unchanged. And it's the only island that maintains an indigenous population of Caribs. All the others have been wiped out. So there you go. I'm making a pitch for Dominica today, completely unplanned.
Thank you so much, Godfrey. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And thank you to everyone in Newfoundland and the webcast.